Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Location: Voyageurs National Park, Minnesota. Date: October 24th, 2017. The fog arrived with the dawn, rolling across Kabetogama Lake in slow, deliberate waves that swallowed the far shore and left only gray silence in its wake. Derek London stood on the dock outside the Ash River Visitor Center, his breath forming small clouds that joined the mist before vanishing. The coffee in his thermos had gone lukewarm during his morning inspection of the boat launch, but he drank it anyway, letting the bitter warmth settle in his chest. 6 years with the National Park Service, 4 of them here at Voyageurs, and he had learned to appreciate these quiet October mornings when the summer crowds were gone and the park returned to something older, something that belonged only to the water and the pines and the things that moved between them. The landscape stretched before him in layers of gray and green, the boreal forest rising from the lake's edge in dense stands of spruce, birch, and aspen. This late in the season, the birches had shed most of their golden leaves, their white bark standing pale against the darker conifers like bones bleaching in the cold. The lakes of Voyageurs formed an interconnected maze spanning over 200,000 acres, a wilderness of granite outcroppings, hidden bays, and islands too numerous to count. In summer, the waterways hummed with motorboats and kayaks. Now, in the dying days of October, the park held its breath. Ice had begun forming along the sheltered shorelines, thin and treacherous, not yet strong enough to walk on, but enough to make boat travel dangerous. Derek checked his watch. 7:15 a.m. He walked back to the station, his boots crunching on the gravel path, and began his morning routine. Equipment check first. He inspected the emergency beacon, verified the satellite phone battery, tested his handheld radio. The familiar weight of the Motorola in his palm was a comfort, a tether to civilization that meant he was never truly alone out here. He logged into the permit system and reviewed the overnight records. Only 3 backcountry permits active. A father-son fishing trip on Locator Lake scheduled to return today, an older couple celebrating their anniversary on one of the Namakan houseboats, and a solo hiker, a woman named Scarlett Reeves, 28, from Madison, Wisconsin. She had registered for a 3-night trip to the Cruiser Lake Trail System, departing October 21st, expected return October 24th. Today. He keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Ash River, morning check-in. The response came clear, slightly bored. Copy Ash River, conditions? Fog on Kabetogama, visibility maybe a quarter mile, temperature 29 degrees, ice forming on the shallows. I'm going to run patrol on the Cruiser Lake access this morning. Verify that solo permit comes back on schedule. Copy that. Be advised, we've got a front moving in this afternoon. Possible snow. Wind advisory after sunset. Understood. Ash River out. He gathered his day pack. First aid kit, emergency blanket, flares, extra batteries, the laminated map of trail networks he could navigate blindfolded by now. Routine. Everything routine. The drive to the Cruiser Lake trailhead took 40 minutes on roads that grew progressively rougher, the pavement giving way to gravel, then to rutted forest tracks that hadn't seen maintenance since spring. The fog thinned as he moved inland, away from the lake, but the sky remained a flat pewter sheet that seemed to press down on the treetops. Derek parked beside a green Subaru with Wisconsin plates, Scarlett Reeves's vehicle, according to the permit. He checked the dashboard. No note, no indication of changed plans. Her return date was today, but she could arrive any time between now and sunset. He decided to hike the first mile of the trail, stretch his legs, make sure no downed trees or washouts had appeared since his last patrol. The forest closed around him immediately, dense and still. Spruce branches hung low over the path, heavy with moisture that dripped onto his shoulders as he passed. The trail was carpeted in fallen leaves, wet and compressed, muffling his footsteps. He breathed deep, the smell of damp earth, decaying vegetation, the metallic tang of cold air that meant winter was close. Halfway to the first trail junction, Derek paused. Something was wrong, though it took him a moment to identify what. Then he understood. Silence. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no rustle of squirrels in the underbrush, no distant woodpecker. Even the dripping from the branches seemed to have stopped. He stood motionless, listening. His hand moved unconsciously to his radio. A twig snapped somewhere to his left. A sharp, distinct sound in the vacuum of silence. Then another, closer. Then nothing. Derek turned slowly, scanning the tree line. The fog had crept back, threading between the spruce trunks in pale tendrils. He saw nothing. No movement, no shape. Nothing but trees and mist and the gray weight of the sky. Hello? His voice sounded flat, absorbed by the fog. Anyone there? Silence. Probably a deer. The rut was starting. Bucks moved erratically this time of year. He'd spooked it, that was all. Derek exhaled, shook his head at his own jumpiness, and continued up the trail. But he walked faster now, and he didn't stop listening. Scarlett had woken that morning with frost on her tent and a feeling she couldn't name. Not fear, exactly. Something more like the awareness of being watched, a prickling at the back of her neck that had begun the previous evening and hadn't faded with sleep. She told herself it was the isolation. 3 days alone in the backcountry did strange things to the mind. You started hearing voices in the wind, seeing shapes in the shadows between trees. It was natural. It was nothing. She packed her camp with practiced efficiency. Sleeping bag compressed into its stuff sack, tent broken down and rolled, bear canister secured in her pack. Today was the hike out, 7 miles back to the trailhead in her car and the promise of a hot shower in International Falls. She'd take the main trail, the one she'd come in on, straight forward. The forest was different in the morning fog. The landmarks she'd memorized, a distinctive boulder, a lightning-scarred pine, a creek crossing, seemed to have shifted position overnight. Scarlett checked her compass, verified her direction, told herself she was being foolish. Trails didn't move. The wilderness played tricks on perception, that was all. She'd been hiking for perhaps an hour when she heard it. A sound like breathing, slow and heavy, coming from somewhere behind her. She stopped, turned. The trail stretched back into the mist, empty. Hello? The breathing stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse. Not natural silence, but a held breath. The silence of something waiting. Scarlett's heart beat harder. She gripped the straps of her pack and walked faster, fighting the urge to run. Running in the backcountry was dangerous. You tripped on roots, twisted ankles, got lost. She was a competent hiker. She'd done dozens of solo trips. There was nothing behind her except fog and trees and her own imagination. The breathing began again, closer now. And under it, another sound. Footsteps. Not human footsteps. Something heavier. Something with a different rhythm. 4 beats instead of 2. Something walking on 4 legs. Scarlett broke into a run. Derek reached the first junction without incident. The trail forked here, left toward Anderson Bay, right toward the Cruiser Lake campsites where Scarlett Reeves should have spent the last 3 nights. He checked his watch. 9:30 a.m. Still early. She might not break camp until noon. Might take her time on the hike out. No reason for concern yet. But the silence bothered him. And there was something else now. Something he noticed as he stood at the junction studying the trail markers. A smell. Faint. Almost imperceptible. Carried on whatever thin breeze moved through the fog. A smell like wet fur and something else. Something copper dark and organic. Blood, maybe. Old blood. He keyed his radio. Dispatch, Ash River. I'm at the Cruiser Anderson Junction. Anything on the emergency channels? Static. Then, River. Repeat. Dispatch, do you copy? I'm getting interference. Breaking up. Say again. The radio hissed, popped, fell silent. Derek checked the battery indicator. Full. Checked the channel. Correct. The equipment was functioning. The signal simply wasn't getting through. He tried twice more, then clipped the radio back to his belt. Atmospheric interference happened sometimes, especially before storms. The front dispatch had mentioned was probably affecting communications. He'd try again from higher ground. The smell was stronger now, and underneath it another scent he recognized from hunting trips as a teenager: musk. The heavy, unmistakable musk of a large predator. Bear. Derek unslung his pack and removed the canister of bear spray, checking the safety, feeling the reassuring weight in his hand. Black bears were common in voyageurs, though they should be preparing for hibernation by now, fattening up on the last berries and acorns before the snow came. Encounters this late in the season were rare. He took the right fork toward Cruiser Lake, walking with the spray ready. The fog thickened as he moved deeper into the forest. The silence remained absolute. Scarlett didn't know how long she'd been running when she tripped. Her boot caught a root hidden beneath the leaves and she went down hard, her pack driving the breath from her lungs as she hit the ground. For a moment she lay stunned, tasting blood where she'd bitten her tongue, staring up at the gray nothing of the sky through the branches. The footsteps had stopped. She pushed herself up slowly, painfully, checking for injuries. Scraped palms, bruised knee, nothing broken. Her compass had come loose from its clip. She found it in the leaves and secured it again. When she looked up, she saw the bear. It stood perhaps 30 feet away, at the edge of visibility where the fog turned solid. A black bear, massive, easily 400 pounds. It watched her with an intelligence that stopped her breath. Not the wary curiosity of a normal bear, not the defensive aggression of a startled animal. This was something else, something calculating. "Hey, bear," Scarlett said, her voice shaking. She remembered the protocols. Make yourself known. Don't run. Back away slowly. "Hey, bear, I'm just passing through. I'm leaving." The bear didn't move. Its eyes, she could see them clearly now, dark and wet and horribly knowing, remained fixed on her face. "I'm leaving," she repeated. She took a step backward. The bear smiled. That was the only word for it. Its lips pulled back from its teeth in an expression no animal should be capable of making. A human expression on a face that was not human. Scarlett's bladder released, warmth spreading down her thigh, and she couldn't care because the bear was still smiling, and now it was moving, not charging but walking toward her on all fours with terrible patience while that smile never changed. She ran again. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed and the forest blurred around her. She ran until she burst into a clearing she didn't recognize and realized, with a horror that went beyond anything she'd felt before, that she had no idea where she was. The fog surrounded the clearing on all sides. The trees had closed in behind her, their trunks pressed together like bars. And somewhere in the mist, something was laughing. A low, rhythmic sound that might have been growling, might have been chuckling, might have been both. She was still standing in the clearing, turning in circles, searching for a path that no longer existed, when the shape emerged from the fog. It wasn't a bear anymore. It was something between shapes, something caught mid-transformation, something with fur and teeth and hands where paws should be, human hands with claws where fingernails belonged. Scarlett opened her mouth to scream, but the sound that emerged was barely a whisper. The shape moved closer, and the last thing she saw before her heart seized in her chest was its eyes. Human eyes, aware and amused, watching her die with something that looked terribly like satisfaction. Derek found the first sign at 10:47 a.m. A torn piece of fabric snagged on a branch, bright red against the gray and green. He photographed it, marked the location on his GPS, continued forward with his senses at full alert. The smell of blood was unmistakable now, thick and metallic, mixing with that predator musk into something that made his stomach clench. He tried the radio again. "Dispatch, this is Ash River, emergency traffic. I have possible signs of animal attack on the Cruiser Lake Trail. Request backup and SAR notification." Static. Silence. Then, clear as if the speaker were standing beside him. "Derek." He froze. The voice on the radio was not dispatch. It was female, young, terrified. "Derek, please. I'm hurt. I need help." He keyed the mic. "Identify yourself. What is your location?" "Please." The voice dissolved into static, reformed. "It's still here. Please help me. I need your 20. Can you describe your surroundings?" Silence. Then the static resolved into something else, not a voice but a sound, low and rhythmic. Breathing. Heavy animal breathing, transmitted through a radio that should only receive signals from other rangers. Derek lowered the radio slowly. His hand was shaking. He knew in that moment that something was very wrong. Not wrong in the way of accidents and injuries and the ordinary tragedies of wilderness. Wrong in a way that didn't fit into any protocol, any training, any rational framework. The old stories came back to him then. Stories he'd heard from Ojibwe elders at community events, from seasonal workers who grew up on the nearby reservations. Stories about people who learned forbidden things, who made deals with spirits that should not be dealt with, who could wear the shapes of animals while keeping their human minds. Bear walkers, they called them. Witches in animal skins. He didn't believe in such things. He couldn't believe in them. But standing alone in the fog with blood smell thick in his nostrils, and that breathing still coming from his radio, Derek London found that what he believed mattered very little. He moved forward. The clearing opened before him without warning. One moment dense forest, the next a rough circle of trampled earth and torn vegetation. The fog hung thicker here, almost opaque, but Derek could see enough. More than enough. The body lay in the center of the clearing. A woman, young, dark hair spread across the leaves. Her eyes were open, staring at the gray sky with an expression of absolute terror frozen on her face. No visible wounds, no blood. She looked almost peaceful, except for those eyes, except for the rictus of her mouth, except for the way her hands were raised as if warding off something that was no longer there. Derek approached slowly, checking the perimeter, seeing nothing but trees and fog. He knelt beside the body and pressed 2 fingers to her throat, already knowing what he would find. Cold skin. No pulse. She had been dead for hours at least. "Scarlet Reeves," he said aloud, and his voice seemed to fall dead in the air. He should call it in. He should establish a perimeter, document the scene, follow protocol. Instead, he knelt beside a dead woman in a clearing that smelled of blood and musk and wrongness. And he listened to the silence, and he felt with absolute certainty that he was being watched. The radio crackled. Derek. His own name, spoken in a voice that was not dispatch, not the terrified woman, not anyone he recognized. A voice that came from everywhere and nowhere, from the fog itself. "Derek, I see you." He stood, bear spray in one hand, radio in the other, turned slowly. The trees at the clearing's edge seemed closer than before, their trunks pressed together, their branches reaching down like fingers. "I know you're there," he said. His voice didn't shake. 6 years in the wilderness had taught him to master his fear, to function when every instinct screamed run. "Whoever you are, whatever you are, I'm not leaving without her." Laughter. That same low rhythmic sound Scarlett had heard before she died. It came from the fog, from the trees, from inside his own skull. Then it emerged. Not from any single direction, from all of them. A shape that was bare and was not bare, that moved on 4 legs and then on 2, that changed even as he watched. Fur rippled across skin that was pale underneath, human skin, and the face that resolved from the transformation was a face he recognized. Jimmy Whitehorse, a maintenance worker from the Kabetogama station, a man Derek had shared coffee with just last week. But the eyes were wrong, the smile was wrong, everything was wrong. The woman was disrespectful, Jimmy's voice said from a mouth that was still too full of teeth. She walked where she shouldn't, took photographs of sacred places, left her garbage on the shore. "Jimmy." Derek's voice came out as a croak. "What happened to you?" Jimmy learned things. Jimmy was taught by his grandmother and her grandmother before her. Old knowledge, powerful knowledge. The shape took a step closer. It was fully human now, naked despite the cold, but moving with a fluidity no human body should possess. The woman had to pay. They always have to pay. And now you've seen too much, Derek. You've seen my face. Derek raised the bear spray. His finger found the trigger. That won't help, the thing that wore Jimmy's shape said. Nothing helps. You can run if you like. The others ran. It's more fun when they run. Derek didn't run. Instead, he thought of Scarlett Reeves's frozen face, her eyes full of terror, her heart stopped by fear alone. He thought of the protocols he'd trained for, the rational explanations that no longer applied, the stories he'd dismissed as superstition, and he made a choice. He turned and walked toward the tree line, not running, walking. One step after another, steady, controlled, refusing to give the thing behind him the satisfaction of his panic. He heard it laugh again, heard footsteps, two-legged, four-legged, something between, following at a distance, playing with him. The fog pressed close. The trees seemed to shift, closing gaps he tried to walk through, opening paths that led nowhere. Derek kept walking. He focused on his breathing, on the weight of his boots on the earth, on the absolute certainty that if he stopped, if he gave in to the terror clawing at his chest, his heart would seize just like Scarlett's. The radio crackled one last time. I'll see you again, Derek. I know where you work. I know where you sleep. This isn't over. Then silence. True silence. And somewhere in that silence, a bird began to sing. Derek emerged from the trailhead at 2:15 p.m., 40 minutes before the storm front arrived. He didn't remember most of the hike out. His mind had retreated to some survival space where only the next step mattered. The green Subaru sat where he'd last seen it, forever waiting for a driver who would never return. He drove to the nearest spot with cell coverage and called dispatch on his personal phone. His voice was calm as he reported finding a body on the Cruiser Lake Trail, as he requested a CR in law enforcement, as he declined to speculate on cause of death. The coroner's report, filed 3 weeks later, would list cardiac arrest of unknown origin. Natural causes, technically. Nothing to investigate. Jimmy Whitehorse didn't return to work that week. When rangers checked his residence, they found it empty, cleaned out, as if he had never existed. Personnel records showed he had been employed at Voyageurs for 11 years. No one could describe his face with any consistency. Photos from staff events showed strange blurs where he should have been standing. Derek requested a transfer to Badlands National Park in South Dakota. Grassland, open sky, no trees for miles, no places for things to hide and watch and wait. The request was approved. On his last night at Voyageurs, packing boxes in his cabin, he heard something outside his window, a scratching like claws on wood. Then a voice, Jimmy's voice or something wearing Jimmy's voice, whispering through the crack beneath the door. I said I'd see you again. Derek didn't open the door. He sat in the center of the room with every light blazing until dawn broke gray and cold over the lake. When he finally stepped outside, there was nothing there, only scratches on the door frame, deep grooves in the wood, and a single track in the frost. A paw print that became a footprint that became nothing at all. He drove out of Voyageurs that morning and never looked back. But sometimes, late at night in his new posting among the endless grasslands, he wakes to the sound of breathing outside his window. Heavy, patient, waiting. Some debts, the old stories say, can never be outrun. The wilderness remembers, and it never forgets a face. Location: Voyageurs National Park, Minnesota. Date: October 29th, 2017. The coffee had gone cold in Marcus's thermos by the time he noticed. He had been standing at the edge of the Kabetogama Lake overlook for nearly 20 minutes, watching the way the morning light struggled to penetrate the low clouds that hung over the water like a burial shroud. October had stripped most of the color from the forest. The birches stood pale and skeletal against the dark mass of pines, and the aspens had surrendered their golden leaves to the wind days ago. What remained was a landscape of grays and deep greens, of black water and white sky, beautiful in that severe way that made tourists uncomfortable and made rangers like Marcus feel, against all reason, at home. He poured out the cold coffee onto the gravel and watched it steam briefly, before the chill air absorbed even that small warmth. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees overnight. Not unusual for late October in northern Minnesota, but the season's first hard frost was coming. He could smell it in the air, that particular metallic sharpness that preceded freezing. The lake hadn't iced over yet, wouldn't for another few weeks, but the water temperature had fallen into the dangerous range, hypothermia in under 10 minutes for anyone unlucky enough to go in. He made a mental note to check that the warning signs at the boat launches were still legible. His morning patrol route took him along the Cruiser Lake Trail, a 9-mile loop through the interior of the Kabetogama Peninsula that saw maybe a dozen hikers per week during peak season, and virtually none this late in the year. The park had officially shifted to winter operations 3 days ago, which meant a skeleton crew of 4 rangers covering over 200,000 acres of interconnected waterways, islands, and boreal forest. Marcus's nearest colleague was stationed at the Rainy Lake Visitor Center, 45 minutes away by boat and even longer by the winding service roads. In practical terms, he was alone out here. He didn't mind. 12 years with the National Park Service had taught him to appreciate solitude, and voyageurs offered it in abundance. The tourists came for the fishing and the northern lights, took their photos from the designated viewpoints, and left before the weather turned. What remained was the wilderness as it had existed for thousands of years. The wolves and moose and black bears preparing for winter, the loons making their last flight south, the ancient rock formations that the Ojibwe and other Anishinaabe peoples had known long before European surveyors gave them English names. Marcus respected this place, more than respected. He understood it, or thought he did. His radio crackled at exactly 7:30 a.m., right on schedule. Kabetogama Station, this is Rainy Lake. Morning check, over. Marcus keyed his handset. Rainy Lake, Kabetogama Station. I read you clear. Starting Cruiser Lake Patrol in 10. Weather looks like fog advisory material. Visibility already dropping over the water. Over. Copy that. We've got the same on this end. Marine forecast says it should burn off by noon, but you know how that goes. Be advised, we had a late registration come through the permit system last night. Solo hiker, female, 26 years old. Name's Evelyn Marsh. She requested the backcountry site at Locator Lake for 2 nights. Checked in at the Kabetogama entrance around 4 p.m. yesterday. Over. Marcus frowned. Locator Lake was deep in the peninsula's interior, accessible only by a challenging portage trail that most experienced hikers avoided this time of year. Solo permit in late October was unusual. Copy, Rainy Lake. Did she check in with the station before heading out? Negative. Permit was self-registered at the kiosk. Looks like she went straight to the trailhead. Understood. I'll swing by Locator on my patrol, make sure she's settled in. Kabetogama Station out. He clipped the radio back to his belt and finished his equipment check with the automatic efficiency of long practice. First aid kit, fully stocked. Bear spray, though the bears were mostly denned up by now. GPS unit, fresh batteries, emergency blanket, fire starter, headlamp. The Cruiser Lake Loop was a day hike, 8 to 10 hours if he kept a steady pace, but the backcountry taught you to prepare for the unexpected. Weather could change in minutes, trails could wash out, people could make bad decisions. The trail started from behind the ranger station, descending through mixed forest toward the first of several portages that connected the peninsula's interior lakes. Marcus moved at his usual pace, not fast but steady, his boots finding the familiar rhythm of root and rock and packed earth. The fog that had blanketed the lake was creeping inland now, threading between the trees in pale ribbons that obscured the middle distance while leaving the immediate surroundings clear. It created a strange effect. Marcus could see perhaps 50 feet in any direction before the world dissolved into white, as if he were walking through a room whose walls kept retreating. The forest was quiet, not silent. There was wind in the high branches, the occasional distant cry of a raven, but quiet in the particular way that autumn woods fall quiet. The summer birds gone south and the remaining creatures conserving energy for the long freeze ahead. Marcus listened as he walked, sorting sounds by instinct. The creak of a dead birch rubbing against its neighbor, the rustle of a red squirrel in the underbrush, the soft drip of moisture condensing on branches and falling to the leaf litter below. Normal sounds. Proper sounds. The soundtrack of a healthy forest. He found the first sign of Evelyn Marsh at the Cruiser Lake Portage, about 2 hours into his patrol. Her boot prints were clear in the soft mud where the trail crossed a small creek. Women's size 8, maybe 9, with a distinct waffle pattern that suggested expensive hiking boots. Recent, too. The edges were still sharp, not yet softened by last night's drizzle. She had passed through here yesterday afternoon, moving at a good pace based on the stride length. Marcus noted the tracks and continued on. The fog had thickened considerably, reducing visibility to 30 feet in places, and the temperature had dropped further. His breath plumed white in front of him. He checked his watch. 10:15 a.m. The marine forecast had promised clearing by noon, but the fog showed no signs of lifting. If anything, it seemed denser here in the forest interior, hanging between the trees like something solid, like something waiting. The trail climbed over a granite ridge and descended toward Locator Lake, where Evelyn's campsite should be. Marcus paused at the ridgeline, trying to see the water below, but there was nothing, just the white wall of fog and, somewhere beneath it, the sound of small waves lapping against stone. He could smell the lake, that distinctive blend of cold water and decomposing vegetation, stronger than it should be. As if the lake were closer than the map indicated. As if it had moved. He shook off the thought and continued his descent. Evelyn had reached the Locator Lake campsite just before sunset the previous day, her legs aching and her spirits high. The portage had been more challenging than the online reviews suggested. The trail was overgrown in places, the boardwalks rotting, but she had made it. And now she had this perfect little clearing all to herself. The lake stretched out before her, mirror still, reflecting the pink and orange clouds of evening with such clarity that she couldn't tell where the water ended and the sky began. She pitched her tent with practiced efficiency, gathered firewood from the designated pile, and cooked a simple dinner of instant noodles and beef jerky while watching the last light fade from the horizon. This was exactly what she had needed. 3 months of 70-hour weeks at the hospital, back-to-back shifts in the ER, patients who lived and patients who didn't. She had felt something inside her calcifying, growing hard and brittle, and she had known that if she didn't get away, truly away, something would break. The fog rolled in after dark. She hadn't expected it. The forecast had called for clear skies, but there it was, creeping across the lake surface like a living thing, spilling over the shoreline and into the trees. Within an hour, she couldn't see the water anymore. Couldn't see anything beyond the weak circle of her headlamp's beam. The fog was so thick it seemed to have texture, seemed to press against her skin with a cool, damp weight that made her shiver despite her fleece jacket. She retreated to her tent earlier than planned, zipping the rainfly tight and burrowing into her sleeping bag. The fog muffled everything. The usual night sounds of wind and water seemed distant, as if coming from very far away, and in their place was a silence so complete it felt like pressure against her eardrums. Evelyn lay awake for a long time, listening to nothing, until exhaustion finally pulled her under. She dreamed of walking. A long trail through white emptiness, following someone she couldn't quite see. Someone always just ahead of her, just around the next bend. She called out, but her voice made no sound. She walked faster, then ran, but the figure ahead never got closer, never got farther away, just kept moving at exactly the pace needed to stay out of reach. And then she woke to pale gray light filtering through the tent fabric. Morning, though it was hard to tell. The fog was still there, even thicker than before, pressing against the tent walls like it wanted to get inside. Her watch read 8:47 a.m. She had slept for nearly 12 hours. Evelyn unzipped the tent and stepped out into the fog. She could see the cold fire pit, the bear hang with her food bag swaying gently, the edge of the clearing where the trees began. Beyond that, nothing. The world ended 10 feet from her tent. She ate breakfast, granola bars, cold, and consulted her map. Her plan had been to spend the day exploring the lakeshore, maybe paddle the small inflatable kayak she'd hauled in, but the fog made that impossible. Too dangerous on the water. She would stay close to camp, maybe hike the short loop trail that circled the lake, wait for the weather to clear. She was packing her day pack when she heard the voice. "Hello?" Evelyn froze. The voice had come from somewhere in the fog. A woman's voice, she thought, though it was hard to tell. Distant but clear, like someone calling from the far shore of the lake. "Hello? Is someone there?" "Hello?" Evelyn called back. "Are you okay?" No response. She waited, ears straining, but the fog had swallowed the sound. Probably another hiker, she told herself. Someone camping on the opposite shore, disoriented by the weather. She should try to find them, make sure they were all right. She started walking toward where she thought the voice had come from. Marcus found the campsite at 11:23 a.m., and he knew immediately that something was wrong. The tent was still standing, zipped tight, rainfly beaded with condensation. The bear hang was intact. The fire pit showed evidence of a small fire properly extinguished. Everything was orderly, exactly as a responsible hiker would leave it, except that no one was there. "Miss Marsh?" he called out. "National Park Service. Anyone in camp?" His voice fell flat in the fog, absorbed before it could echo. He waited. No response. He approached the tent and called again, then unzipped the fly when silence continued. Empty. Sleeping bag still laid out. Boots missing. Day pack missing. She had left the campsite voluntarily, taking appropriate gear. Probably out for a morning hike. Except the fog was impenetrable, had been all morning, and even experienced hikers knew better than to wander in zero visibility conditions. Marcus had been navigating by GPS and compass for the last hour. Every ranger handbook in existence warned against attempting trail navigation in heavy fog without proper equipment. Maybe she had it. He didn't know what gear she was carrying beyond what the permit required. He checked his watch. 11:31 a.m. The responsible thing was to wait. Give her an hour, maybe two. She might have stepped away to use the latrine, might be on a short loop that would bring her back to camp. No reason to assume the worst. Marcus sat down on a log near the fire pit and keyed his radio. "Rainy Lake. This is Kabetogama Station. I'm at the Locator Lake backcountry site. The registered camper, Evelyn Marsh, is not present. Tent and gear are here, but she appears to have left camp. Fog conditions are severe. I'm going to wait at the site for 1 hour. Over." Static, then faintly. "Betogama. Copy. Conditions. Advised." The transmission was breaking up. Marcus tried again. "Rainy Lake, please repeat. I did not copy your last. Over." More static. Something that might have been words, or might have been nothing. Then silence. He checked the radio's battery indicator. Full charge. Checked the antenna connection. Secure. The equipment was fine. The interference was coming from somewhere else. The fog seemed thicker now. Marcus couldn't see the tent anymore, though it was less than 20 feet away. He could see his own boots, the log he sat on, the immediate circle of leaf-covered ground. Beyond that, white. Absolute white. And then, from somewhere in that whiteness, a voice. "Marcus?" He was on his feet before the conscious thought to move, hand going to his bear spray before recognizing how useless it was. The voice had been clear, unmuffled by the fog, a woman's voice, not the hiker's. Older, familiar in a way that made his heart stutter. "Marcus, honey, are you out there?" His mother. The voice was his mother's voice, but his mother had been dead for 6 years. "Who's there?" he called, and hated the way his voice cracked. "Identify yourself." Silence. Then, from a different direction, behind him now when the voice had been ahead, "Marcus, I've been waiting." Not his mother's intonation. The words were right, the pitch was right, but the rhythm was wrong. His mother had spoken quickly, words tumbling over each other. This voice was slow, deliberate. tasting each syllable. Marcus didn't respond. He stood perfectly still, controlling his breathing, forcing his heart rate down through sheer will. 12 years in the wilderness had taught him that panic killed faster than any animal. He needed to think. The voice had come from 2 different directions within seconds. That was impossible. No one could move that fast through this terrain, not without making noise. He hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't heard branches breaking, hadn't heard anything except the voice itself, emerging from the fog like something the fog had created. There were stories. Every ranger in the North Country had heard them. Old stories, First Nation stories, about things that lived in the spaces between worlds. The Ojibwe elders who still visited the park sometimes spoke of them in careful, oblique terms. Spirits of the fog and the water and the thin places where the land grew uncertain. Not evil exactly, but other. Operating by rules that had nothing to do with human logic. Marcus hadn't believed those stories. He was a practical man. A man who dealt in GPS coordinates and weather reports and the observable behavior of wildlife. The wilderness was dangerous enough without inventing supernatural threats. But standing in that clearing, unable to see 5 feet in any direction, listening to his dead mother's voice come from impossible angles, Marcus understood that belief was irrelevant. The stories existed because something had inspired them, and that something was here. "Miss Marsh," he called, choosing the practical approach. "Evelyn Marsh, if you can hear me, please respond. I'm with the National Park Service. I can help you." The fog shifted. Not wind, there was no wind, but something moving within the fog, displacing it. A shape resolved from the whiteness. Humanoid. Standing perhaps 30 feet away, motionless, its features completely obscured. "Miss Marsh?" The shape didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, watching him from a face he couldn't see. And then there were 2 shapes, then 3. Each one exactly 30 feet away, spaced evenly around the clearing, forming a triangle with Marcus at its center. He turned slowly, trying to keep them all in view, and found that he couldn't. When he faced one, the others vanished into the fog, and when he turned to find them, new shapes appeared at the edges of his vision. He understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water in his veins, that he was being surrounded. Evelyn had been walking for what felt like hours. The trail had disappeared almost immediately, but she kept moving toward where she thought the voice had come from, stepping over fallen logs and pushing through underbrush that grabbed at her clothes. The fog was disorienting. She couldn't tell if she was going straight or curving, climbing or descending. Her compass was no help. The needle kept swinging, never settling on a direction, as if the magnetic poles themselves had become uncertain. She had stopped calling out after the first 15 minutes. The voice never answered, but other sounds had started. Footsteps that paralleled her own just out of sight. The crack of branches from directions she hadn't walked. Once, impossibly, her own voice calling back to her from somewhere ahead. The rational part of her brain was still working, still cataloging possibilities. Disorientation, auditory hallucinations from stress and exhaustion, the fog creating acoustic anomalies. There were explanations for everything she was experiencing. There had to be. But beneath the rational explanations, something older was waking up. Something that recognized the wrongness of this place on a level deeper than thought. Every nerve in her body was screaming retreat, turn back, run, but there was no back to return to. The fog had closed behind her as thoroughly as ahead. She checked her phone for the 100th time, no signal. GPS showed her position as a pulsing dot in the center of the lake, which was impossible. She was on solid ground, had been the entire time. The time display read 10:34 a.m., but she had been walking since before 9, walking for hours, and the light hadn't changed at all. "Hello?" she called again, her voice small against the white void. "Hello?" The fog answered back. Her own voice, perfect in every detail, coming from somewhere to her left. Evelyn felt her legs give out. She sat down hard on a fallen tree and put her head between her knees, fighting the vertigo, the absolute wrongness of hearing herself speak words she hadn't spoken. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. She was a nurse, a scientist, a person who believed in the explainable world. When she raised her head, there was a figure standing in the fog. It was 10 feet away, maybe less. Humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but the proportions were wrong. Too tall, too thin, and its face. Evelyn couldn't see its face. The fog clung to it like a veil, like the figure was made of fog itself. And where features should be, there was only smooth, shifting whiteness. But she knew it was looking at her. Knew it with the same certainty she knew her own name. "What are you?" she whispered. The figure tilted its head, a gesture almost curious, almost human. And when it spoke, it used her mother's voice. Her mother, who had died of cancer when Evelyn was 19, whose last words had been a request to see the northern lights one more time. "Evelyn, sweetheart, I've been waiting so long." Marcus ran. He knew it was wrong. Knew the backcountry training that said movement in zero visibility was suicide. But the shapes were closing in, their slow approach more terrifying than any charge. He ran blind through the fog, branches whipping his face, roots grabbing his ankles, and somehow he stayed upright. Somehow he kept moving, the rasp of his own breathing the only sound in the white world. His radio crackled. "Cuss. Marcus." He grabbed it without stopping. "I'm here. Rainy Lake, I need immediate assistance. Locator Lake area, possible missing person, possible..." "Marcus." The voice from the radio wasn't dispatch. It was his mother's voice again, clear through the static. "Stop running, honey, you're going the wrong way." He threw the radio, watched it disappear into the fog, heard it hit the ground somewhere behind him, kept running. The lake appeared without warning. One moment fog, the next moment water, black and still as glass. Marcus skidded to a stop inches from the shore, heart hammering, and realized he had no idea how he'd gotten here. This wasn't Locator Lake. The shape was wrong, the shoreline unfamiliar. He didn't recognize anything. Across the water, perhaps 50 feet out, a figure was walking on the surface. Not floating, not swimming, walking, each step creating small ripples that spread outward in perfect circles. And beside the figure, slightly behind, another shape, smaller, moving with the uncertain gait of someone being led. "Miss Marsh?" Marcus called. His voice came out broken, barely audible. The smaller figure turned. Through the fog, through the distance, he couldn't see her face, but he saw her hand raise, saw her mouth open as if to call back. No sound came. The fog swallowed her gesture the way it swallowed everything, and then both figures were moving away, walking toward the center of the lake, toward the point where the fog was thickest, where nothing was visible at all. Marcus didn't follow. He stood at the shore and watched until they disappeared, until the last ripple faded, until the lake was still again. Then he sat down on the cold rocks and waited for the fog to lift. Search and rescue reached the Locator Lake campsite at 4:47 p.m. after the fog finally cleared. They found Marcus sitting where he'd collapsed, unresponsive to verbal commands, staring at a fixed point in the middle distance. His core temperature was 94 degrees. He was treated for moderate hypothermia and evacuated by float plane. Evelyn Marsh's tent, gear, and supplies were recovered intact. Her boot tracks led from the campsite toward the lake, then vanished at the water's edge. Dive teams searched for 3 days. They found nothing, no body, no clothing, no indication of where she had gone or what had happened. The official report listed her as a probable drowning. Case closed due to lack of evidence. Marcus took medical leave, then extended leave, then permanent disability, citing post-traumatic stress and recurring psychological episodes. He never returned to Voyageurs, never returned to any park. He moved to Phoenix, Arizona, as far from northern lakes and boreal forests as he could get while remaining in the country. Somewhere dry, somewhere the fog never came. Some nights he still hears his mother's voice calling from the next room. He's learned not to answer. He filed a supplemental incident report before his departure, detailing what he witnessed at Locator Lake. The document was classified as anomalous and archived without investigation. 3 other rangers had filed similar reports over the past 40 years, describing fog, voices of dead relatives, figures walking on water, None of the cases had been solved. None of the missing had been found. The Ojibwe have a name for the entity. They say it lives in the place where the world grows thin, where fog touches water touches sky, where the boundaries between here and somewhere else begin to dissolve. They say it collects people, not from malice, but from loneliness. It takes them to a village on the other side, a place where the sun never rises, where the fog never clears, where the dead and the taken walk together on endless gray shores. They say, once you answer its voice, you belong to it forever. Marcus never answered. That's why he survived. But sometimes, in the dry Arizona nights, he wonders about Evelyn Marsh. Wonders if she's still walking through that white emptiness, following a voice that sounds like someone she loved, searching for a destination that doesn't exist. Wonders if she's still looking for a way home. The fog always lifts eventually, but some things, once lost, stay lost forever. Location: Voyageurs, National Park, Minnesota. Date: November 8, 2019. The fog came in slow that Friday morning, rolling across Kabetogama Lake like something poured from a bottle. Derek Hollis watched it from the window of the Ash River Visitor Center, while his coffee cooled in its thermos cup, the steam rising to meet the condensation already forming on the glass. November in Voyageurs meant gray. Gray water, gray sky, gray trees stripped bare and standing like bones against the horizon. The birches had lost their gold weeks ago, and now only the black spruce and balsam fir held any color, their deep green almost black in the flat morning light. He'd been stationed here for 5 years now, long enough to know the park's moods the way you know a difficult friend. In summer, Voyageurs was generous. Hundreds of lakes connected by waterways, islands scattered like puzzle pieces, enough beauty to make the long winters feel worth it. But November was the park's bitter month, the season of transition when the water couldn't decide whether to freeze or flow, and the silence grew so heavy you could feel it pressing against your eardrums. The summer staff were gone. The houseboats were dry docked. Even the wolves seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the snow that would make hunting easier. Derek finished his coffee and began his morning checks with the methodical patience of a man who understood that routine was the skeleton that held wilderness work together. Battery levels on the emergency radio, full. Satellite phone charged and functional. GPS unit showing correct coordinates for the station, 48.0892 degree N, 92.8456 degree W. He logged each item in the daily report, his handwriting neat despite the cold that seeped through the walls. The propane heater rattled in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the damp. He pulled on his insulated jacket, checked that his flashlight was in the left pocket where it always lived, and grabbed the clipboard with the day's patrol route. The morning's task was simple enough. Check the backcountry campsite registrations against actual use, verify that the seasonal closures were properly posted along the Cruiser Lake Trail, and make sure no one had ignored the warnings about thin ice on the smaller inlets. Most visitors had the sense to stay away this time of year, but every November brought one or two who thought the solitude was worth the risk. Usually photographers, sometimes researchers, occasionally someone running from something that had nothing to do with the wilderness at all. His radio crackled as he stepped outside, the cold hitting his face like a slap. Ash River, this is Kabetogama Station, radio check over. Derek keyed the mic. Kabetogama, Ash River reads you loud and clear. Beginning morning patrol of Cruiser Lake Sector. Expected return by 1400 hours. Over. Copy that, Ash River. Be advised, we've got a single vehicle in the chain of lake slot since yesterday afternoon. Registration shows a day permit for one Evelyn Marsh. Expected return by 1800 yesterday. No contact, no callback. Might be nothing. Might want to check the trailhead. Over. Derek felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came with overdue hikers. Probably nothing. People lost track of time, changed plans, forgot to check out. But November was unforgiving. Copy, Kabetogama. I'll start at Chain of Lakes, Ash River out. He took the service road north, the truck's heater blasting against the chill that crept through every seam. The fog thickened as he drove, reducing visibility to perhaps 50 yards. Shapes loomed and receded, a boulder that looked like a crouching animal, a dead tree that seemed to lean toward the road as he passed. The forest here was old, the kind of old that made you feel watched, even when you knew you were alone. Ojibwe territory for thousands of years before the fur traders came, before the loggers, before the Park Service drew lines on maps and called it preserved. Derek had learned enough history to respect what he didn't understand about this land. The elders at the Bois Fort Reservation had stories about these woods that didn't appear in any ranger training manual. The Chain of Lakes parking lot held a single vehicle, a silver Honda CR-V with Wisconsin plates, a thin layer of frost coating the windows. Derek pulled alongside and killed his engine. Silence rushed in. Not the comfortable silence of a quiet morning, but something heavier, more deliberate. He sat for a moment, listening. No birdsong, no wind. Even the trees seemed to be holding still. He approached the Honda and cleared the frost from the driver's window with his gloved hand. Inside, the car was tidy. A reusable water bottle in the cup holder, a paperback novel on the passenger seat, a fleece jacket folded neatly in the back. On the dashboard, a handwritten note. Back by 6 p.m. Don't worry, Mom. Just chasing the last light of autumn. Love, E. Evelyn Marsh, the name on the permit. Derek photographed the note and the vehicle, then checked the trailhead registry. Her handwriting again, dated yesterday. Evelyn Marsh, solo hiker, Chain of Lakes loop via Locator Lake Trail. Out, 1:30 p.m. Expected return, 6 p.m. 15 hours overdue. He radioed in. Kabetogama, this is Ash River. Vehicle confirmed at Chain of Lakes lot. Registration indicates solo female hiker on Locator Lake Trail. Departed 13:30 yesterday. No sign of return. I'm beginning foot search of the initial trail section. Request you notify search and rescue coordinator. Possible overnight missing person, over. The response came scratched with static, unusual for this distance. Copy, Ash River, SAR, notified. Be advised, weather, visibility, deteriorating. Check in every 30 minutes. Over. Say again, Kabetogama. You're breaking up. 30 minutes. Check in. Over. Derek frowned at the radio. Clear signal a moment ago, now this. Atmospheric interference from the fog, probably. It happened. He clipped the radio to his belt and started up the trail. Evelyn had felt the wrongness before she understood it. She'd been hiking for perhaps 2 hours when the trail began to feel unfamiliar. Not wrong exactly. She'd studied the map, she knew the route, but somehow less certain than it had been. The blazes on the trees seemed farther apart. The ground, which had been well packed from summer traffic, grew softer, less defined. She stopped at what should have been the junction with the Locator Lake spur and found only unbroken forest. That was when she checked her phone and discovered she had no signal. Expected, this deep in the backcountry. She checked her physical map, orientating it with her compass. According to her calculations, the junction should be exactly here. She was standing in it, but the junction wasn't there. Okay. She'd made an error somewhere, miscounted the distance maybe, or confused a game trail for the main path. It happened to experienced hikers, and she was only intermediate at best. The smart thing was to backtrack, find the last definite marker she recognized, and try again. She turned around. The trail behind her looked different than she remembered. The fog had thickened while she walked, reducing the forest to a series of gray shapes emerging and receding. But that wasn't it. The massive fallen birch she'd climbed over 20 minutes ago, the one with the fungal shelf jutting from its side like a frozen wave, wasn't there. She would have to climb over it again to go back. She hadn't passed it. Evelyn stood very still, her breath clouding in the cold air. Logic. Apply logic. She was disoriented, yes, but she wasn't lost. She had a compass. She had a map. She had enough daylight. She checked her watch, 3:47 p.m., to retrace her steps carefully. The fog was playing tricks with her perception. That was all. She began walking back the way she'd come, counting her steps this time. 100, 200, 300. The trail should have curved left by now, following the contour of the ridge. It continued straight. 400, 500. A tree she didn't recognize, its bark scarred in a pattern that looked almost deliberate. 600, 700. She stopped. Ahead of her, the fog parted briefly, and she saw a clearing she had never seen before. Derek found the first blaze marking Evelyn's route about a quarter-mile in. The orange diamond faded but visible against the gray bark of a red pine. The trail was well maintained here, the path clear despite the fallen leaves that carpeted everything in shades of brown and rust. His boots crunched steadily as he walked, the sound comforting in its normalcy. He called out every few minutes, "Hello, Park Service, anyone out here?" and listened to his voice disappear into the fog without echo. At the half-hour mark, he reached for his radio. "Kabetogama, this is Ash River, routine check-in. Position approximately 1 mile northeast of Chain of Lakes trailhead following Locator Lake Trail. No sign of missing hiker yet. Trail conditions good. Continuing search. Over. Static." Then faintly, "Ash River. Copy. Continue. Kabetogama, you're very broken. Can you relay through Crane Lake Station? Over." No response. Just the static, and beneath it, something that might have been a voice but might have been the wind. Derek checked the radio settings. Correct frequency, good battery, antenna intact. The fog then. Some kind of atmospheric phenomenon. It happens sometimes, especially near the lakes, especially in transitional weather. He continued up the trail, moving faster now. Evelyn had been out overnight in temperatures that dropped to the mid-20s after sunset. Even with good gear, hypothermia was a real risk. He'd seen what the cold could do to people who weren't prepared, and even to some who were. A mile and a half in, he found her water bottle. It lay in the middle of the trail, upright, as if someone had set it there carefully rather than dropped it. Derek crouched and examined it without touching. Same bottle from the car, distinctive dent on the cap, faded sticker of a mountain range on the side, half full. No signs of struggle in the surrounding area, no disturbed vegetation, no blood. Just the bottle, waiting. He photographed it, marked the GPS coordinates, and tried the radio again. "Kabetogama, this is Ash River. I've located personal effects belonging to missing hiker approximately 1.5 miles from trailhead. Water bottle, deliberately placed. No sign of owner. Request immediate SAR team deployment to my coordinates. Over." The radio hissed. Then a voice, but not dispatch. Not any voice he recognized from the station. A woman's voice, thin and distant, almost mechanical in its flatness. "Derek." He froze. "Derek, I'm here. I found her." His thumb hovered over the transmit button. The voice had come through on the emergency frequency, the one only Park Service personnel could access. But it wasn't anyone he knew. It wasn't any voice he'd ever heard. "Identify yourself, over." Silence. The fog seemed to press closer, the trees leaning in like they wanted to hear the answer. "Derek." The voice again, and now he could hear something wrong with it. The syllables didn't quite connect. The rhythm was off, like someone had learned how to speak by listening but never quite understood the music of human conversation. "I found her. She needs help. Come." He did not respond. His hand had dropped from the radio, and he realized he was holding his breath. In 5 years with the Park Service, Derek had heard a lot of strange things. Interference from distant broadcasts, wildlife that made almost human sounds, the acoustic tricks the landscape played on tired ears. This was different. This was wrong in a way that bypassed his rational mind and spoke directly to something older, something that knew what predators sounded like when they learned to mimic prey. He started walking again, faster now, but not toward the voice. He followed the trail, looking for more signs, trying to ignore the prickle at the back of his neck that said he was being watched. Evelyn stood at the edge of the clearing and felt the last of her certainty drain away like water through sand. The clearing wasn't natural. The trees hadn't simply failed to grow here. They had been pushed back, creating a perfect circle perhaps 30 feet across. The ground was bare earth, no leaves, no undergrowth, as if something had scraped it clean. In the center stood a single boulder, waist high, its surface covered in lichen that formed patterns too regular to be random. And around the boulder, arranged in a careful spiral, were objects: a rusted compass, a child's shoe, a pair of glasses with one lens missing, a leather wallet black with age, a wedding ring. Offerings. The word rose unbidden in her mind, and with it came a fragment of memory, something her grandmother had said once about the woods in the north, about the small ones who lived in the old places and demanded payment for passage. She'd been a child then, half asleep, and the words had slipped away with morning. Now they came back sharp and clear and terrifying. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around and run until her legs gave out, but when she tried to step backward, her body wouldn't obey. Her feet were rooted, her muscles locked. She could only stand and stare at the clearing as the fog closed in around it, erasing the forest, erasing the trail, erasing everything but this place and its terrible patience. A sound from behind her. Footsteps. Small, quick, wrong. Too many of them, pattering against the earth like rain. She turned. The fog was full of shapes. Derek found the place where the trail ended. Not ended, stopped. The path simply ceased to exist, as if someone had erased it from the landscape with a giant hand. One moment he was walking on packed earth marked with blazes. The next he faced a wall of undergrowth so thick a rabbit would struggle to pass through. He checked his GPS. According to the coordinates, he should be in the middle of the Locator Lake Trail, well marked and well maintained. According to his eyes, there was no trail here at all. He tried the radio, knowing it was pointless. Kabetogama Ash River. I've lost the trail. GPS shows me en route, but the trail is not present. Requesting guidance, over. The static that came back had a quality to it now that made his skin crawl. It sounded almost like laughter, high-pitched chittering filtered through electronic hiss. He turned the radio off. Think. Think like a ranger, not like a scared kid in the woods. Trails don't disappear. The GPS could be malfunctioning. Magnetic interference, software glitch, any number of explanations. He'd simply gotten turned around in the fog. It happened. The thing to do was backtrack to the last known point, the water bottle, and try again. He turned around and started walking, counted his steps. 100, 200. The fog was thicker now, so thick he could barely see his own feet. 300, 400. He should have reached the bottle by now. 500, 600. He stopped. Ahead of him, barely visible through the gray, was a clearing, a circle of bare earth, a boulder in the center. He had never come this way. The shapes in the fog resolved slowly, reluctantly, as if they didn't want to be seen but couldn't help themselves. Small figures, child-sized but not children. Their proportions were wrong, their limbs too long, their heads too large. Their skin was the gray-brown of dead leaves. Their eyes, when she could make them out, were black and wet and reflected nothing. There were perhaps a dozen of them, surrounding the clearing, emerging from the fog one by one. They didn't move like humans. Their joints bent in directions that made her stomach lurch. Some walked on two legs, others moved on all fours, scuttling, their movements quick and insectile. None of them made a sound. They simply appeared, took their positions, and waited. Evelyn wanted to scream. Her throat was locked, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. She could feel tears streaming down her face, hot against the cold air, but she couldn't make a sound. One of the figures stepped forward. It was shorter than the others, its face more defined, almost human, like a child's mask made by someone who'd had a human face described to them but never actually seen one. Its mouth moved. Evelyn. Her name, in her own voice. The thing was using her own voice, stolen from somewhere, played back like a recording on a broken machine. Evelyn, you came. We've been waiting. It smiled. The smile was wrong. Too wide, too many teeth, going on and on past where a mouth should end. We've been waiting such a long time. Derek stood at the edge of the clearing, his hand on his sidearm, his radio dead, his certainty shattered. The boulder was there exactly as he hadn't imagined it. He'd never been here before, never seen this place, and yet it felt familiar in a way that made his bones ache. The object spiraled around it. A compass, a shoe, glasses, a wallet, a ring. Each one someone's possession. Each one he understood with terrible clarity, taken from someone who had stood where he was standing. Someone who had been lost. Someone who had been found by the wrong things. Ranger Hollis. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, thin and mocking. He spun, his hand drawing the gun without conscious thought, pointing it at nothing. Fog. Trees. The shapes of branches like grasping fingers. Put that away. It won't help. The fog rippled and something stepped out of it. Not a person, not quite an animal. Something in between. Something that had been made to look almost right, but couldn't quite manage it. It was small, no taller than a child, but the way it held itself suggested age beyond measurement. Its eyes were the color of dirty ice, and they watched him with an intelligence that had nothing human in it. "Your kind comes to our woods," it said, and its voice was a chorus now, multiple tones layered over each other, and thinks they can draw lines on maps, thinks they can name things and own them. "You've been here 5 years, Derek Hollis. We've been here since before the ice. We remember when the water was higher. We remember when your kind first walked out of the cold and saw us watching from the trees." Derek couldn't speak. His throat was frozen, his tongue thick and useless. The gun in his hand felt like a toy, a child's imitation of a weapon. "We took something that belongs to you, didn't we?" The thing tilted its head, the motion bird-like, wrong. "Or someone, I suppose you'd call her. She came to our woods alone, and alone is such a dangerous thing to be here. We showed her our special place. Would you like to see what we showed her?" It gestured toward the boulder, and Derek's gaze followed against his will. Evelyn Marsh was sitting on the ground beside it, her back against the stone, her eyes open and staring at nothing. She was breathing. He could see the fog of her exhalations, but there was no recognition in her face, no awareness. She looked like someone whose mind had simply left. "She's still in there," the thing said almost conversationally. "Most of her. We only took the parts she wasn't using. The fear, mostly. It's such a useful thing, fear. It keeps your kind alive. It keeps you out of places like this. She had so much of it, she was delicious." Derek raised the gun. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely aim. "I'm taking her out of here. Are you?" The thing smiled, and its smile was full of needle teeth. "I don't think so, Derek Hollis. I don't think you understand where you are. You followed our trail. You listened to our voices on your little talking box. You came into our home." The fog closed in. Derek couldn't see the trees anymore. Couldn't see anything but the clearing, the boulder, Evelyn, and the small gray shape that watched him with ancient, hungry patience. "But we're not unreasonable," it continued. "We've had our fill of her. She can go, what's left of her. But there's a price, Ranger. There's always a price." It pointed at him with one long, crooked finger. "Your voice. Give us your voice and we'll let you both leave. We collect them, you see. Voices. They're so useful for calling the next one home." The others emerged from the fog then, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, their small forms ringing the clearing, their black eyes fixed on him with horrible anticipation. Derek understood in that moment what had happened to every lost hiker, every unexplained disappearance, every case that went cold because there was simply nothing to find. "Choose," the thing said. "Your voice or your life. The woman comes free either way. We're done with her. But you, Derek Hollis, you have to choose." He thought of the radio, dead in its holster, thought of the voices he'd heard, stolen voices, speaking words their owners had never said, thought of spending the rest of his life silent, knowing that somewhere in these woods something was using his voice to lure the next victim into the dark. He pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the silence, and it did nothing. The thing didn't flinch, didn't bleed, didn't react at all. It simply stood there as the echo faded, and when the sound was gone, it sighed. "Such a waste," it said. "Such a terrible waste." The fog rushed in. The cold was beyond anything Derek had ever felt. Beyond physical, reaching into his chest and squeezing something fundamental. He tried to scream and found that his throat was empty, his voice already gone, taken without his consent, and the last thing he saw before the darkness was the thing's smile, the thing's terrible, impossible smile, and behind it, Evelyn's empty eyes reflecting nothing at all. The search team found them 3 days later. Derek Hollis was unconscious but alive, curled at the base of a spruce tree half a mile from the Chain of Lakes parking lot. He'd been exposed to the elements for at least 48 hours, but somehow, the doctors couldn't explain it. He wasn't hypothermic. His core temperature was exactly normal. His vital signs were stable. He woke in the hospital 2 days later and was unable to speak. The initial diagnosis was psychological trauma affecting speech, but later examinations revealed something physical. His vocal cords were intact, but they simply didn't respond, wouldn't vibrate, wouldn't produce sound, as if they'd forgotten how. Evelyn Marsh was found beside him in similar condition. She recovered faster. Her voice was intact, her body unmarked, but she never remembered what happened after she stepped off the main trail. Her last clear memory was the fog thickening. Her next was the hospital ceiling. The time between was simply gone. She didn't remember the clearing or the boulder or the small gray shapes. She didn't remember anything at all. The official report listed both cases as exposure-related incidents exacerbated by poor visibility and navigational error. The water bottle was never recovered. The clearing with the boulder was never found. Search teams combed the area repeatedly and reported nothing unusual except an odd acoustic phenomenon. In certain locations, they could hear voices in the fog, distant and distorted, speaking words they couldn't quite make out. Derek Hollis retired from the Park Service 3 months later on medical grounds. He moved south to a flat place with few trees and wide horizons. He learned sign language. He never returned to Minnesota, but sometimes late at night when the wind is right, visitors to Voyageurs National Park report hearing something strange on the emergency frequencies. A man's voice, calm and professional, directing them toward the Chain of Lakes trail. "This way," the voice says. "I found something. Come and see." The rangers who've been there long enough know not to follow. They know that some calls are better left unanswered. And somewhere in the old woods, in the places where the fog never quite lifts, small shapes watch and wait and remember. They remember every voice they've taken. They remember every name. And they are so very, very patient. Location: Congaree National Park, South Carolina. Date: October 23, 2016. And the morning mist rose from the black water like breath from a sleeping animal. Garrett Hayes stood on the elevated boardwalk near the Harry Hampton Visitor Center, cradling his thermos of coffee and watching the fog curl between the ancient bald cypress trees. Their buttressed trunks emerged from the dark water like the legs of giants frozen mid-stride, draped in Spanish moss that hung motionless in the still air. He had worked at Congaree for 6 years now, and still this view made him pause. 26,000 acres of old-growth bottomland hardwood forest, the largest intact expanse left in North America, a place that looked exactly the same in every direction, tupelo and cypress and sweet gum repeating endlessly, the water table rising and falling with the seasons, transforming trails into creeks and back again without warning. He checked his watch, 6:47 a.m. The visitor center wouldn't open for another hour, but Garrett preferred arriving early, before the humidity climbed, and the air thickened into something you had to push through rather than breathe. October in the Low Country was unpredictable. Warm enough during the day to sweat through your uniform, cold enough at night to see your breath. The Weather Service had issued an advisory for the approaching storm system, heavy rains expected by evening, possible flooding in the lower sections of the park. He'd need to check the water gauges along Cedar Creek, and potentially close the Weston Lake Loop if levels rose too high. Inside the station, Garrett completed his morning ritual with the comfortable rhythm of long practice. He logged into the computer system, reviewed the overnight incident reports, nothing unusual, just a note from the evening ranger about a family of raccoons getting into the trash bins again, and checked the trail registry. 3 groups had signed in yesterday and not yet signed out. A father-son pair on an overnight camping permit at Bluff Camp, a bird-watching group of 4 from the Audubon Society, and a solo hiker named Natalie Vance, age 28, who had registered for a day hike on the Oak Ridge Trail at 2:15 p.m. Garrett frowned at the entry. Solo hikers weren't unusual, but the Oak Ridge Trail connected to several unmarked paths that could disorient even experienced visitors. He made a mental note to swing by the trailhead parking lot during his morning patrol. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3 conducting morning comms check, over." Garrett spoke into his handheld radio, the familiar weight of it reassuring in his palm. The response crackled back immediately, clear and crisp. "Unit 3, dispatch reads you 5x5. Morning patrol commencing?" "Affirmative. Starting with Cedar Creek gauge check, then north to Bluff Camp for permit verification. Should be back at station by 1100. "Copy that, Unit 3. Weather advisory still in effect. Rain expected by 1600. Keep us posted on water levels." "Will do. Unit 3 out." The parking lot at the Oak Ridge Trailhead held only 2 vehicles, a white pickup registered to the Audubon Group and a silver Honda Civic with Georgia plates. Garrett ran the Civic's tags through the system, registered to Natalie Vance of Savannah. He peered through the driver's window. A reusable water bottle sat in the cup holder, half empty. A paperback novel lay on the passenger seat, spine cracked, a receipt tucked between the pages as a bookmark. On the dashboard, a handwritten note in looping script. "N. Call me when you're back. Don't forget dinner at 7. Love, Mom." Garrett felt the first stirring of unease. Day hikers who registered at 2:15 p.m. should have returned well before dark. The Oak Ridge Trail was a 4-mile loop, 3 hours at a leisurely pace. Even accounting for delays, she should have been back to her car by 6 p.m. at the latest. He checked the trail registry again. No sign out recorded. She could have simply forgotten, driven away without logging her return. It happened. But the car was still here. He tried to rationalize. Perhaps she'd extended her hike, pushed further than intended, made camp somewhere. But her permit was for day use only, and the weather last night had dropped into the low 50s, uncomfortable without proper gear. His gut told him something was wrong. 6 years in this park had taught him to trust that instinct. The swamp was different that morning. Garrett noticed it as he walked the first quarter-mile of the Oak Ridge Trail, calling Natalie's name at intervals. The usual symphony of the bottomland, the drilling of woodpeckers, the rustle of squirrels in the canopy, the persistent drone of insects, had fallen silent. Not gradually the way it does when a predator moves through and the small creatures hold their breath. This was absolute, total, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire forest. Garrett stopped walking, listening. His own breathing seemed obscenely loud. The creak of his boots on the boardwalk planks echoed in the stillness. A heron, he told himself. A great blue heron landing nearby could silence a section of forest for minutes. Or a gator sliding into the water. Natural explanations. He continued forward, but the silence followed him like a second shadow. And when the sounds finally returned, a single crow calling somewhere to the east. The relief he felt was disproportionate, almost desperate. Natalie Vance had not planned to get lost. She had hiked dozens of trails in Georgia and South Carolina, knew how to read a map, knew to stay on marked paths. But Congaree was different. She understood that now. Standing in the middle of what should have been the Oak Ridge Loop, staring at a section of forest that looked exactly like the section she had passed 20 minutes ago. The same fallen log bridging the same blackwater slough. The same curtain of Spanish moss hanging from the same cypress branch. The same. She checked her phone. No signal, which she'd expected, and consulted the paper map she'd grabbed from the visitor center. According to the trail markers, she should have reached the junction with the Weston Lake Spur by now. Instead, she was here, wherever here was. The afternoon light had begun to slant through the canopy at an angle that suggested time was passing faster than it should. She had been walking for 2 hours. The loop was supposed to take 3 hours total. She should be nearly back at the parking lot, not deeper in the swamp. Turn around, she told herself. Retrace your steps. Simple. She turned and stopped. The trail behind her, the trail she had just walked, ended. Not gradually, not at a junction, but simply ceased to exist. Where there had been a raised boardwalk moments ago, there was only water. Still, black water reflecting the gray sky, stretching between the cypress trunks without a ripple. Natalie stared at it for a long moment, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. She had walked that path. She had felt the planks beneath her feet. And now there was nothing. A sound behind her, soft, rhythmic. Footsteps on wood. She spun around. Nothing. Just the trail continuing forward into the deepening gloom of the forest. But she had heard it. Someone walking. Someone close. Hello? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Is someone there? The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, Natalie became aware of something else. A smell. Not the usual swamp smell of decomposition and black earth, but something sharper, metallic. Like blood, but older. Like the memory of blood. And then she saw the dog. Garrett found the first sign of Natalie's passage at the half-mile marker. A snapped branch at waist height, the break fresh, the exposed wood still pale. Someone had pushed through the undergrowth here, leaving the main trail. He crouched to examine the ground, difficult to read in the soft, wet soil. But there were impressions, footprints heading east toward the interior of the park where the old-growth forest grew densest and the water rose highest. Dispatch Unit 3. I'm at marker 0.5 on Oak Ridge. Found evidence our missing day hiker left the trail heading east. Requesting backup for search and rescue. Static. Then distantly. Unit 3. Repeat. Signal. Dispatch, do you copy? Requesting backup for SAR on Oak Ridge Trail. More static, stretching longer this time. When the response finally came, it sounded wrong. The voice too slow, the words oddly spaced. Unit 3. Proceed. She's waiting. Garrett stared at the radio. That wasn't dispatch protocol. That wasn't even dispatch's voice. He tried again. Dispatch, please confirm. Who is this? Silence. Not static. Silence. The radio had been working fine all morning. He checked the battery. Full. Checked the channel. Correct. Everything functioning. And yet when he pressed the transmit button again, nothing happened. The radio sat dead in his hand. The storm arrived faster than predicted, the sky darkening from gray to charcoal in minutes. Garrett felt the barometric pressure drop like a physical weight settling on his shoulders, and with it came the first fat drops of rain, striking the canopy above and beginning their long descent through the layers of leaves. He had a decision to make. Return to the station for backup and proper SAR equipment, or continue following Natalie's trail while it was still visible. The rain would erase her tracks within the hour. He continued forward. The forest closed around him as he left the main trail, the undergrowth thickening, the spaces between trees narrowing until he was pushing through curtains of hanging moss and stepping over root systems that rose from the water like grasping fingers. The rain intensified, drumming against his hat, running down the back of his neck. Thunder rolled somewhere to the west, a low rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself rather than the sky. Garrett called Natalie's name every few minutes, but his voice disappeared into the forest without echo, as if the swamp were swallowing the sound. He found her backpack at the base of an ancient tupelo, half submerged in the rising water. Inside, a wallet with her ID, a granola bar wrapper, a small journal with handwritten entries. The last entry, dated yesterday. The ranger at the visitor center said to stay on the marked trails, but I saw a dog on the path. Beautiful thing, some kind of hound, and it looked at me like it knew me, like it wanted me to follow. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear its eyes were glowing, not reflecting light, glowing, from inside. Garrett's blood went cold. He knew that story. Everyone who worked in the Low Country knew that story, even if they didn't believe it. His grandmother had told him when he was a boy, her voice dropping to a whisper, as if the thing might hear its name spoken aloud. The Platte Eye. A spirit that haunted the swamps and lonely roads, that could take the shape of any animal, that lured travelers from safe paths with familiar faces and glowing eyes. "You see an animal after dark in the swamp," his grandmother had said, "and its eyes shine like lanterns. You don't follow it. You don't look at it. You turn around and you run." He didn't believe in plat eyes. He was a park ranger, a man of science and procedure. But standing in the rising water with Natalie's abandoned backpack in his hands, listening to the rain and the thunder and the absolute silence beneath them, Garrett realized that belief was irrelevant. Something was in this forest. Something had led Natalie Vance off the trail, and now it knew he was here too. Natalie had followed the dog for what felt like hours, though time had stopped making sense. The animal moved just ahead of her, always visible, never quite close enough to touch. It was beautiful, a sleek black hound with a smooth coat and long legs, the kind of dog that belonged on a southern plantation, loping across manicured lawns. But they weren't on a lawn. They were deep in the swamp, deeper than she had ever been, and the dog never seemed to notice the water that rose past her ankles, past her knees. It walked on the surface as if the black water were solid ground. She should have turned back. She knew she should have turned back. But every time she tried, the forest rearranged itself, paths closing, new ones opening, and the only constant was the dog, waiting for her, watching her with those eyes, those terrible eyes that glowed with a light that had no source, amber gold and too bright, too knowing. "Where are you taking me?" She had stopped asking the question hours ago, but it slipped out now, desperate, exhausted. The dog turned. For the first time, it faced her directly, and Natalie saw that it wasn't a dog at all. The shape was wrong, too long, too angular, the joints bending in directions that made her stomach lurch. And the face. The face was almost human now. Almost. A woman's features emerging from the canine skull, shifting and flickering like a reflection in disturbed water. Familiar features. Her mother's features. Natalie. The voice was her mother's voice, but the mouth didn't move right, the lips stretching too wide, revealing teeth that were neither dog nor human. "You forgot to call. I was worried." Natalie tried to run. Her legs wouldn't move. She tried to scream. The sound died in her throat. The thing that had been a dog took a step toward her, and the forest groaned, the trees leaning inward, the water rising around her, and she understood finally that she had never been lost. She had been led. Every step, every turn, every choice that felt like hers, all of it had been the path the thing had laid out for her, long before she ever set foot in this swamp. She was exactly where it wanted her to be. The water touched her chin. The thing with her mother's face smiled. Garrett heard the scream. It came from somewhere ahead, muffled by the rain but unmistakable. A human voice, female, raw with terror. He ran, crashing through the undergrowth, the water splashing around his legs, branches tearing at his face and arms. The light was failing now, the storm and the approaching dusk combining to reduce visibility to mere feet. He switched on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the rain, but illuminating nothing except more trees, more water, more endless forest. "Natalie! Natalie, can you hear me?" No response. He kept running, following the direction of the scream until his foot caught on a submerged root, and he went down hard, the flashlight flying from his grip and landing face down in the water, its light extinguished. Darkness. Complete darkness. Garrett lay in the shallow water, gasping, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples. He reached for his radio. Dead. Reached for his flashlight. Couldn't find it, couldn't feel anything except water and roots and mud. He forced himself to breathe, to think. Get up, get your bearings, find higher ground. He stood, and that's when he saw the eyes. They floated in the darkness, perhaps 20 feet ahead, 2 points of amber light absolutely still, watching him with an intelligence that was palpable, predatory, not reflecting his flashlight, which was gone. Generating their own light, soft and steady like lanterns burning in a distant window. "Who's there?" His voice cracked. The eyes blinked, and then, impossibly, they multiplied. 2 became 4, 4 became 6, 8, A dozen pairs of glowing eyes, surrounding him in a loose circle, each pair at a different height, some low to the ground, some at chest level, some high in the trees, and all of them watching, all of them waiting. A voice spoke from directly behind him, close enough that he felt the breath on the back of his neck. A voice he recognized. Garrett. His own name, in his grandmother's voice. "You were warned, boy. You were warned and you came anyway." He didn't turn around. Some deep primal part of him understood that turning around would be the last thing he ever did. Instead, he closed his eyes and recited the words his grandmother had taught him. Words he hadn't spoken in 30 years. A prayer in Gullah that he barely remembered. Syllables that felt foreign in his mouth, but right somehow. Right in a way nothing had felt right since he'd entered this part of the forest. The air changed. The pressure lifted just slightly. And when Garrett opened his eyes, the glowing orbs were gone. The darkness remained, but it was natural darkness now. The darkness of a stormy night in the swamp, nothing more. He found his flashlight by luck or providence, floating face up a few feet away. The beam flickered when he switched it on, but held. He walked, didn't run, couldn't run, his legs shaking too badly, back the way he had come, following his own disturbed trail through the water, and by some miracle or mercy he emerged onto the Oak Ridge boardwalk an hour later, rain-soaked and mud-covered, and unable to stop trembling. They found Natalie Vance 3 days later, face down in a slough half a mile from where Garrett had lost her trail. The official cause of death was drowning. The medical examiner noted no signs of struggle, no injuries beyond those consistent with thrashing in shallow water. A tragic accident, the report concluded. A day hiker who lost her way in an unfamiliar park, panicked, and drowned in water barely 3 feet deep. Garrett read the report in his office alone and said nothing. He didn't mention the journal entry, didn't mention the eyes, didn't mention his grandmother's voice speaking from the darkness, or the words he'd spoken in response. Some things weren't for official reports. Some things lived only in the spaces between what happened and what could be explained. He requested a transfer the following week. Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, anywhere without swamps, without Spanish moss, without black water that reflected nothing and hid everything. The request was denied. Budget constraints, staffing shortages, the usual bureaucratic responses to a man trying to run from something that couldn't be named. 6 months later, Garrett still works at Congaree. He still does his morning patrols, checks the water gauges, verifies camping permits. He's good at his job, professional and thorough, and if his colleagues notice that he never enters the interior forest after dark anymore, never takes the trails that branch east toward the old growth, they don't mention it. Sometimes late at night, he hears a dog barking somewhere in the swamp, a hound's bay, mournful and distant. The sound always comes from the direction he refuses to go, and it always stops the moment he reaches for his radio. He never follows it. He never looks. But some nights, when the mist rises from the black water and the silence grows thick as Spanish moss, Garrett thinks he sees something moving between the cypress trunks. A shape that walks on 4 legs or 2 or none at all. A shape with eyes that glow from within, patient and old, watching the boardwalk where a ranger stands with his thermos of coffee, waiting for the morning that will surely come. The Platt-Eye remembers. The Platt-Eye knows his name. And someday, when Garrett forgets his grandmother's prayer or grows too tired to speak it, the swamp will welcome him home. Location: North Cascades National Park, Washington. Date: October 23, 2019. The fog came down from the high ridges like something poured, settling into the valleys of North Cascades with the slow inevitability of floodwater finding its level. Derek Morrow stood on the porch of the New Halem Ranger Station, watching it erase the tree line piece by piece. First the distant peaks vanishing into gray, then the middle slopes, then the Douglas firs just 300 yards out, until the world ended at the edge of the parking lot. The air smelled of wet stone and decomposing cedar, that particular autumn scent the Pacific Northwest wore like a second skin from October through March. He'd learned to read weather in his 6 years with the Park Service, and this fog carried rain behind it. The kind of slow, soaking drizzle that turned trails to mud and made hypothermia a genuine concern for anyone caught unprepared. He checked his watch. 7:42 a.m. The morning had that stillness unique to weekdays in the off-season, when the summer crowds had retreated and only the serious hikers remained. Derek finished his coffee, black from the pot he'd started at 6, and went back inside to begin his morning checks. The station was quiet, just him and the hum of the space heater fighting the chill that crept through the old windows. He pulled out the trail registry log, thumbing through yesterday's entries. 3 day hikers on Thunder Creek back before dark. A photography group on the Cascade Pass Road, vehicle logged out at 4:15 p.m., and 1 overnight permit. Lily Chen, 28, solo hiker, planned route from the Colonial Creek campground up toward 4th of July Pass, expected return October 23rd by noon. Derek noted the name, the route. Solo hikers in October weren't unusual. Some people preferred the solitude, but he always paid closer attention to the ones going out alone. He pulled up her permit application on the ancient desktop computer. Emergency contact, mother, address in Seattle. Experience level marked as intermediate. Gear checklist looked appropriate for an overnight in current conditions. She'd done this before, it seemed. Good. The mountains didn't care about good intentions. They cared about preparation. The radio crackled to life, dispatch running the morning check-in. All units, Marble Mount Dispatch, 0800 roll call. Derek keyed his shoulder mic. Dispatch Unit 7, New Halem Station, present and operational. Other voices followed. Unit 3 from the Hozomene Station, Unit 12 running backcountry patrol near Ross Lake. The ritual of it was comforting, all those voices confirming that the park's nervous system still functioned, that someone was always listening. When the check-in finished, Derek grabbed his day pack from its hook by the door. Standard loadout. First aid kit, emergency blanket, water, protein bars, bear spray, backup radio batteries. He added his rain jacket, checked his flashlight, good habit, even for a morning patrol, and headed out to walk the Thunder Creek trailhead before the fog got any thicker. The forest received him the way it always did, with indifference. That was what Derek appreciated about working in a place like this. The mountains existed on a scale that made human concerns feel appropriately small. The cedars along the Thunder Creek Trail had been growing for 300 years, before anyone thought to call this place a national park, and they'd keep growing long after the ranger stations crumbled to nothing. There was peace in that, if you had the temperament for it. The fog muffled everything. His footsteps on the packed earth, the distant rush of the creek, the occasional drip of condensation falling from branch to branch. Visibility had dropped to maybe 50 feet, the trees emerging from the gray like figures stepping out of smoke. About a mile in, Derek stopped to check the trail conditions. The path here showed signs of recent foot traffic, boot prints in the soft mud, pressed deep enough to suggest a loaded pack. The tread pattern looked like standard hiking boots, women's size 7 or 8. Probably Lily Chen, heading up toward her permitted campsite yesterday morning. He noted the direction of the prints, the spacing that suggested a comfortable pace. Nothing alarming. He continued on, making mental notes of a fallen branch that would need clearing, a section where water runoff had started to erode the trail edge. It was somewhere around mile marker 2 that Derek first noticed the silence. Not quiet. The forest was always quiet in fog like this. But silence. The kind that pressed against the eardrums like something physical. No bird song. No squirrel chatter. No sound of wind moving through the canopy. Even the creek, which should have been audible from this section of trail, had gone mute. Derek stopped walking, head tilted, listening. His breath seemed obscenely loud in the vacuum. Probably just the fog, he told himself. Sound behaves strangely in heavy moisture, gets absorbed, redirected. He'd experienced it before. This was nothing new. He continued walking, but slower now, some animal part of his brain registering what his conscious mind refused to acknowledge. The trail curved around a massive cedar, its trunk wider than his arm span, And on the other side, Derek found the first wrong thing. A hiking boot sitting upright in the middle of the trail. Women's, size 7 or 8, caked with mud. Just the one boot, laces still tied, as if someone had simply stepped out of it and kept walking. Derek crouched beside it, frowning. People didn't lose boots like this, you'd notice. You'd come back for it. Unless something made you keep moving. Unless stopping wasn't an option. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 7, static answered. Then distantly, 7, go ahead. Dispatch, I've got an anomaly on Thunder Creek Trail, mile 2. Single boot appears recently abandoned. I'm going to continue toward the 4th of July Pass Junction. Check on our overnight permit." The response came broken, words drowning in interference. "Copy. Update. 20. Derek tried again, but the static had thickened into something almost organic, a hiss that seemed to breathe. He checked the channel, checked the battery. Everything read normal. The mountains played hell with radio signal sometimes. Everyone knew that. Nothing to worry about. He marked the boot's location on his GPS, coordinates 48.6847 degree N, 121.0894 degree W, and kept moving. 14 hours earlier, Lily Chen had stood at the same spot and looked up at the trail ahead with something close to joy. October in the North Cascades was her favorite time. The summer crowds gone, the air sharp and clean, the larches just starting to turn gold on the high slopes. She'd been planning this trip for months, a 24th birthday gift to herself. 2 days alone in the wilderness, sleeping under stars, proving she could do it. The permit had been easy to get. The weather forecast looked manageable. Her pack held everything she needed. The fog hadn't worried her when it started rolling in around 3 p.m. Fog was normal here, especially in autumn. She'd made good time, reached her campsite at 4th of July Pass with 2 hours of daylight left, set up her tent with practiced efficiency. Dinner was freeze-dried pad thai, eaten while watching the fog turn pink with sunset. Perfect. This was exactly what she'd needed. Space to breathe, silence to think in, a reminder that the world contained more than office cubicles and rush hour traffic. It was after dark that the whistling began. The sound came from somewhere down the slope, below her campsite. A single note, clear and sharp, like someone signaling to a friend. Lily sat up in her tent, listening. Another hiker. There shouldn't be anyone else up here. She'd checked the registry. Maybe someone had come up the other trail from the Diablo Lake side. The whistle came again, closer now. Then again, from a different direction entirely, and again from somewhere behind her tent. Multiple people then, or one person moving very fast. Lily unzipped her tent and looked out into the darkness. The fog had thickened with nightfall, reducing her headlamp beam to a weak cone that illuminated nothing but swirling moisture. "Hello?" she called. Her voice fell flat against the fog, absorbed instantly. "Is someone there?" The whistling stopped. Somehow, the silence was worse. She stayed awake for hours, listening, but heard nothing more. Eventually, exhaustion won out. She dreamed of a trail that kept looping back on itself, of walking for miles only to find her own footprints ahead of her, fresh and perfectly preserved. She woke to gray light and the understanding that something was wrong. Her campsite looked different. The tree she'd used to hang her food bag was gone, not cut down, just gone as if it had never existed. The slope below her seemed steeper than she remembered, and the trail she'd come up, the clear path she'd followed for 5 miles. She couldn't find it. She walked the perimeter of the clearing 3 times, increasingly frantic. There was no trail. There were no markers. There was only forest, endless and identical in every direction, and fog so thick she couldn't see more than 30 feet. Lily forced herself to breathe. She had a compass. She had a GPS. She had training. She pulled out the GPS unit, waited for it to acquire satellites, and watched the screen display coordinates that made no sense. According to the device, she was 17 miles east of where she'd camped. That was impossible. She hadn't moved. She'd slept in the same spot, in the same tent, and somehow the world had rearranged itself around her. The whistling started again, and this time it was close. Derek found the campsite at 10:47 a.m. The tent was still standing, fly properly secured, but the door hung open. Inside, a sleeping bag, neatly arranged, a stuffed sack with clothes, a paperback novel, bookmark 3/4 through. No pack, no food bag, no sign of Lily Chen except the evidence that she'd been here, she'd slept here, and then she'd left in a hurry without taking her shelter. He circled the clearing, looking for tracks. The mud held impressions, boot prints the right size leading away from the tent toward the western tree line. But they didn't continue into the forest. They simply stopped at the edge of the clearing, as if Lily had walked to the trees and then... what? Flown? Vanished? Been lifted straight up into the fog? Lily Chen? Derek called. His voice died in the moisture. Park Service. If you can hear me, call out. Nothing answered. Then, a whistle. Low, melodic, somewhere off to his left, and Derek's blood went cold because he recognized that sound. His grandmother had told him about it when he was a child, when they'd visited relatives on the Tulalip Reservation. She'd called them by their Coast Salish name, words he couldn't pronounce, but others called them Stick Indians, shadow people who lived between the trees. They communicated in whistles, she'd said. And if you ever hear them and you whistle back, that's you agreeing. That's you accepting the invitation. That's you becoming theirs. He had laughed the way children laugh at stories meant to frighten them. That was 23 years ago. He wasn't laughing now. Lily, he shouted again, louder, desperation cracking his professional calm. Lily Chen, identify your location, a voice answered from the fog. Derek? He spun. That was impossible. That was his name, spoken in a voice he knew. But the voice belonged to his partner, Kelly, and Kelly was 40 miles away at the Marble Mount station. Kelly wasn't here. Kelly couldn't be here. Derek, I found her. Kelly's voice again, coming from somewhere in the trees. She's hurt. Come quick, I need help. Every instinct screamed at him to stay still. The voice was wrong, not in tone, not in pitch, but in some quality beneath the surface. The pauses fell in strange places. The rhythm was off, like a musician playing from sheet music they'd never heard performed. Derek. Closer now. Please. She's dying. He keyed his radio with shaking hands. Dispatch, Unit 7, emergency. I need immediate backup at 4th of July Pass. Possible injured hiker, possible... He didn't know how to finish that sentence. Possible what? Possible hostile contact. Unknown nature. Please respond. The radio gave him nothing but that breathing static, and then from somewhere behind him, Derek. He turned. Lily Chen stood at the edge of the clearing. She was pale, her hiking clothes soaked through, mud caked up to her knees. Her eyes were focused on something just past his shoulder, something he couldn't see. Lily, thank God, are you... Don't answer them, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, throat raw. Whatever you do, whatever they sound like, don't answer them. Who? What's out there? She finally looked at him and he saw that her eyes were wrong. The pupils too large, the irises somehow faded, as if something had been looking through them for too long. I answered, she said. Yesterday, I heard my mother's voice calling from the trees, and I answered. The whistling started again. 1 note, 2 notes, 3 coming from every direction at once, surrounding them, closing in. Derek grabbed Lily's arm, pulled her toward the trail he'd come up. But the trail was gone. Where packed earth and boot prints had been 15 minutes ago, there was only undergrowth. Ferns, fallen logs covered in moss. Ancient, undisturbed forest. It does that, Lily said, her voice hollow. The paths move, or we do. I don't know anymore. Derek pulled out his compass. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle. He tried the GPS. The screen flickered, showed coordinates that placed them 200 miles out in the Pacific Ocean, then went dark. The whistling grew louder, closer, harmonizing with itself in patterns that shouldn't be possible from any throat, human or animal. Derek could feel it now, a presence in the fog, something vast and patient and terribly interested. It had been watching them. It had been watching them for hours, maybe longer, herding them like sheep toward a pen they couldn't see. When I answered, Lily said, I saw them just for a second between the trees. She was crying now, silent tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. They looked like people, almost. If people were made wrong. If someone tried to build a person from instructions they'd only read about. A shape moved in the fog to Derek's left. Tall, too tall. The proportions subtly wrong, arms too long, joints bending at angles that made his eyes hurt to follow. Kelly's voice, Derek breathed. That was them. They learn, they listen and they learn. They've probably been listening to you for years, every radio call, every conversation, waiting. Another shape to the right, and another, directly ahead. The whistling had become something else now, layered, complex, a sound that was almost language. Derek felt an overwhelming urge to respond, to whistle back, to complete the pattern they were offering. It would be so easy. Just one note. Just one answer. Don't, Lily whispered, reading his face. I know. It feels like the right thing to do. It feels like the only thing, but if you answer, Derek, his father's voice now, dead 3 years, coming from somewhere impossibly close. Son, I'm lost. Help me. Please. The grief hit him like a physical blow. His father's voice, perfect. Exactly as he remembered it. I'm scared, son. It's dark here. Please help me. It's not him, Lily said, gripping his arm. It knows what hurts you. It knows exactly what to say. Derek closed his eyes. The shapes were closer now. He could feel them, the wrongness of their presence pressing against his skin like static electricity. The whistling rose to a crescendo, his father's voice layering over it, begging, pleading, and then, impossibly, his radio crackled. Unit 7, this is dispatch. Do you copy? Unit 7, we're showing your GPS beacon stationary for 30 minutes. Please confirm status. Real. The voice was real. Scratchy, distant, fighting through interference, but real in a way the other voices weren't. Derek keyed the mic with numb fingers. Dispatch Unit 7. I have one subject located at 4th of July Pass. Disoriented. Possible hypothermia. Request immediate helicopter evacuation. Do you copy? Copy. Helicopter. En route. ETA 20. Hold position? We hold position, Derek said, more to himself than to Lily. We don't move. We don't answer. We wait. The shapes in the fog went still. The whistling faded to a single sustained note, low and disappointed. Derek could feel their attention shift, recalculate. They had been so close. They had almost had him. The next 20 minutes were the longest of his life. He and Lily stood back to back in the clearing, not speaking, watching shapes move through the fog just at the edge of visibility. Twice more his father's voice called to him. Once, Lily made a sound like a sob when something spoke in a voice Derek didn't recognize. Her mother probably, or someone else she'd lost. They didn't answer. The helicopter came in low over the ridge, rotors beating the fog into temporary submission. Derek saw the trees clearly for the first time in hours. Normal trees, normal forest, the trail visible again as if it had never disappeared. The shapes were gone. The whistling had stopped. Everything looked exactly as it should. Lily was airlifted to St. Joseph's in Bellingham. Severe hypothermia, dehydration, psychological trauma. She would recover, physically. Derek gave his statement to the ranger supervisor, sticking to the facts he could prove. Disoriented hiker, equipment failure, adverse weather conditions. He didn't mention the voices. He didn't mention the shapes in the fog. He didn't mention his father. Some things don't go in reports. He requested a transfer 3 days later. Desert assignment, somewhere flat and open, where you could see the horizon in every direction, where nothing could hide in the spaces between trees. The request is still pending. Budget constraints, staffing shortages. Derek returns to North Cascades tomorrow for his regular shift. The fog is supposed to roll in again by afternoon. Sometimes, late at night, he still hears whistling outside his cabin window. A single note, patient and clear, waiting for an answer.